The agreement is still a long way off. Tehran is holding out. Here on VisualPolitik, we've already talked about the main reasons, but the Iranians also know they have a new lever to apply pressure if things get out of hand again. This is the waterway that could put the world even more on the ropes at any moment. And no, this time I'm not referring to the Strait of Hormuz. VisualPolitik community, there's a place on the map that medieval Arab sailors gave a name you won't forget: Bab el-Mandeb. In Arabic, it literally means the Gate of Tears, and it's no coincidence. For centuries, ships attempting to cross this strait, barely 30 kilometers wide, faced deadly winds, treacherous currents, and pirates without the slightest compassion. So many sailors died that the people of the area decided to give it the name, the Gate of Tears. And now, in the midst of 2026, the entire world is once again looking toward that very same gate.
Bab al-Mandeb, how the Gate of Tears may emerge as Iran's second choke point after Hormuz.
While we all have our eyes fixed on Iran, Israel, and the Strait of Hormuz, there is another maritime corridor that could be on the verge of becoming the next major flashpoint in the Middle East conflict and the ultimate trigger for a global crisis. The fact is, the Red Sea is under threat. In 2025, Trump launched an air campaign against the Houthis after the group attacked commercial traffic in the Red Sea with missiles and drones. And now, naturally, with the war against Iran raging, the danger is that this group will launch a similar offensive again. And this is no joke, because the danger is real. So much so that Washington is taking it very seriously.
U.S. aircraft carrier is traveling around Africa to the Middle East.
To avoid any risk of falling into a kind of ambush, the George H.W. Bush, a 100,000-ton nuclear-powered aircraft carrier, decided on its return to sail around the entire African continent to avoid any trouble in the Red Sea. This obviously meant thousands and thousands of extra kilometers, a much longer journey, more fuel, and significantly higher overall costs to avoid passing through Bab el-Mandeb. But of course, that is not the major risk. The major risk is that Hormuz basically remains closed and the Houthis are emboldened to attack ships at this other critical point, because that would greatly delay the shipment of Saudi oil tankers heading to Asia. And it stands to reason that could greatly exacerbate the energy crisis that is already brewing. VisualPolitik community, what we're seeing isn't just a temporary situation, it poses an unacceptable strategic risk. And remember, this is something that is already having consequences. Already, we can see unexpected developments like this.
U.S. seeks to reset ties with reclusive but strategically vital African state. Eritrea has been described as Africa's North Korea, and its Red Sea coastline makes it a potential bulwark against Iranian influence.
That's right. While the whole world has its eyes on Iran, the United States has just made a move in a completely unexpected place: Eritrea. Probably one of the most unknown, isolated, and secretive countries on the entire planet. An impoverished, militarized African country that has been ruled for decades by one of the world's most repressive regimes, the so-called African North Korea. A country completely off the international media radar that could now, with this conflict, end up becoming a major geopolitical player. That's why Washington is now exploring ways to re-establish relations with this country. According to several sources, Massad Boulos, one of Trump's top envoys for the Middle East and Africa, has already informed foreign governments that Washington plans to begin lifting some sanctions against Eritrea. And naturally, this is where the big questions come in. Why does Eritrea suddenly matter? Exactly what is at stake in the Red Sea? Well, pay close attention, because sometimes the most important piece on the game board isn't the one that shines the brightest. It's the one nobody is looking at. Let's get started. But before we dive in, here's a scary thought. Your entire digital life is basically one compromised password away from becoming someone else's business. Emails, files, private documents, personal photos, and the worst part, most people only start caring about privacy after something goes wrong. That's where Proton comes in. Proton combines Proton Mail and Proton Drive in one account, giving you encrypted email and secure cloud storage in a single place. And unlike Google or Microsoft, not even Proton itself can access your data. You stay in control. With Proton Mail, you get protection against phishing, spam filters, and email aliases, so you can sign up for websites without exposing your real address. And with Proton Drive, you can securely store photos, documents, contracts, anything important with end-to-end encryption. You can can even share files using passwords or expiring links without worrying about your data being scanned, sold, or used to train AI. That's the big difference. Your files and emails actually belong to you. Everything stays organized, synced across your devices, and easy to access without sacrificing privacy. And the best part, Proton Mail and Proton Drive are completely free to use. You only pay if you want more advanced features or extra storage. So if you want to take back control of your digital life, check out Proton using the QR code on screen or the link in the description.
The other shore.
There's been a lot of talk about Hormuz, but take a closer look. Imagine a triangle. At the northern tip, the Suez Canal, 205 meters wide, an artificial waterway connecting the Mediterranean Sea with the Red Sea. At the eastern end, the Strait of Hormuz, and at the southern tip, the Bab el-Mandeb Strait. 30 kilometers wide and divided into two channels by a small Yemeni island called Perim. Well, this very triangle is one of the major circulatory systems of the global economy. Between 12 and 14% of all global trade passes through the Red Sea each year. This includes 30% of global container traffic. Goods worth more than $1 trillion. 40% of all trade between Europe and Asia. And currently, the approximately 4 million barrels per day that Saudi Arabia manages to export through the port of Yanbu. Well, the point is that without this route, the entire global trade system has to take a detour around the Cape of Good Hope off the southern coast of Africa. We're talking at best about 10 extra days of sailing, strained supply chains, and a more than considerable increase in procurement costs. And do you know what the problem is? The Houthis know this all too well, and so do the Iranians. Making these waters unnavigable would be a devastating blow to global economic stability, and this is precisely what brings us to Eritrea.
Eritrea gained its independence from Ethiopia in 1993 after 30 years of war, and from that very first day, its president, Isaias Afwerki, has ruled without interruption, without elections, without mercy, and without accountability to anyone.
33 years later, he remains in power. In independent Eritrea, he has built one of the most secretive and repressive regimes in the world. The US Congress even calls it the North Korea of Africa. And it's no wonder Freedom House, the organization that assesses political and civil rights around the world, ranks Eritrea and North Korea at exactly the same level of authoritarianism. UN experts have documented systematic torture, religious persecution, and forced disappearances for decades, as well as mandatory and indefinite national military service. That's right, men and women can spend entire decades forced to serve the state. That's why every year thousands of Eritreans flee the country, risking their lives. So the question is clear. What on earth has Washington seen in a place like this? Well, the most honest answer we can give you is geography and infrastructure. Take a look. Eritrea does not control Bab el-Mandeb the way Iran can threaten the Strait of Hormuz. It has no navy. It has no fleet capable of blocking the strait, no destroyers patrolling the Red Sea, and of course, it cannot single-handedly guarantee the security of one of the world's most sensitive maritime routes. If the Houthis decided tomorrow to launch a new campaign of attacks against merchant ships, Eritrea wouldn't exactly be the player capable of stopping them militarily. But that's not the point. The point is that Eritrea has something that, in a maritime crisis, could be almost as valuable as a fleet. We're talking about more than 1,100 kilometers of mainland coastline on the Red Sea, right on the African side of the route connecting Bab el-Mandeb with Suez. The fact is, the United States doesn't just need ships in the waters of the Red Sea. It needs staging areas. It needs ports where it can refuel, repair, store, rotate supplies, and support operations. It needs runways from which surveillance, transport, or reconnaissance aircraft can operate. And when I say aircraft, I mean drones. It needs locations from which to observe what is happening, quickly detect threats, and coordinate escorts. And above all, it needs to avoid relying exclusively on one single country. You see, until now, the major Western military anchor in the region had been Djibouti, which has become a sort of luxury resort for foreign armies. It's home to Camp Lemonnier, the large US base in the Horn of Africa, but we can also find China's first overseas military base in this small country. And it's not just the United States and China. In Djibouti, Sea, we also find the presence of France, Japan, Italy, and other players with naval interests in the area. As I said, it's practically a resort for the major armed forces. But that's also its main problem. It's saturated. In other words, Washington operates in a country where its greatest strategic rival is also stationed. That's why Eritrea is beginning to be seen as much more attractive. It would allow for the dispersal of resources, the opening of alternative routes, the creation of greater logistical depth along the African coast, and a reduction in dependence on a single point of support. A clear example is the port of Assab in southern Eritrea, about 120 kilometers from Bab el-Mandeb. During the war in Yemen, the United Arab Emirates used facilities in Assab as a logistical and military platform. In other words, there's already a clear precedent of a regional power projecting its influence using this infrastructure. Clearly, Eritrea not only has an advantageous location on the map, but also specific conditions that could make it a strategic asset. To name just a few, Assab has 7 deep water berths, over 1,000 meters of wharf, a maximum draft of nearly 11 meters, and extensive storage areas. In other words, it has sufficient capacity to receive large ships, move enormous volumes of cargo, and support logistical and military operations of a certain scale right in the middle of the Red Sea, right at the entrance to the strait. At the same time, it's true that these figures are outdated and must be treated with caution, because Eritrea is an extremely opaque country and not exactly a haven of statistical transparency, so these facilities are likely in a state of serious disrepair. But even with that caution, it's clear that Assab is not simply an empty beach facing Yemen. And then on top of that, right next to it, a little further north, is the port of Massawa, which is Eritrea's main commercial port. They're not major infrastructure projects, but they would greatly facilitate any control operation. And right across from Massawa, we find another location that often goes unnoticed, but could be very important for controlling these waters. I am referring to the Darlak Archipelago. In this case, it's a group of islands and islets located in the middle of the Red Sea, about 50 kilometers from the Eritrean coast, with Darlak Kabir as the main island. And pay attention, because there are precedents that clearly demonstrate the importance of this archipelago. During the Cold War, the USSR established the Soviet Navy's 933rd Logistical Support Point on Darlak Island, within the Darlak Archipelago. Obviously, it was not a mega base like Sevastopol, but it was a facility designed to support, if necessary, naval operations in the Red Sea, the Persian Gulf, and the Indian Ocean. It had docks, warehouses, fuel and water storage facilities, a heliport, some residential infrastructure, and even a floating dock, the PD-66, capable of lifting some 8,500 tons. In other words, at this base, which operated between 1977 and 1991, Soviet ships could be repaired, resupplied, and maintained far from home. And now, rather than Moscow, they could be attracting Washington. As I mentioned a moment ago, Djibouti is saturated and is under the watchful eye of their greatest adversary. Sudan is torn apart by civil war, Yemen is a threat, and Somalia remains fragile, although Israel is trying to secure that spearhead with Somaliland. Anyway, then there's Eritrea, an awkward player, but it's also one of the few coastal states with strong state control over a critical maritime position. Not surprisingly, this possibility comes at a price much higher than it seems at first glance. Because what exactly is Trump's plan with Eritrea? What are the real risks involved with this possibility?
The new Red Sea chessboard.
Well, to understand what Washington intends with Eritrea, you first need to understand that the Eritrean government has been treated by the United States for decades as a problematic, isolated, and practically toxic state. In 2021, the Biden administration imposed sanctions against the ruling Eritrean party, senior regime officials, and parts of the military for their role in the war in Ethiopia. Specifically, they were accused of committing numerous murders, systematic abuses, and massive human rights violations. And that's not all. The United States has been denouncing the repressive record of Isaias Afwerki's regime for decades. In fact, the Trump administration included Eritrea in its ban on entry into the United States list in 2025. What's more, the State Department has repeatedly designated it as a country of particular concern due to its religious persecution, especially against Christian groups. But now all of that is suddenly being left behind.
U.S. to lift Eritrea sanctions as Red Sea tensions reshape alliances, document says.
Behind-the-scenes diplomacy has been underway for months. In September, Masad Boulos, Trump's special envoy for Africa, met with Eritrean Foreign Minister Osman Saleh Mohammed in New York on the sidelines of the UN General Assembly. Next, in late 2025, Boulos met privately in Cairo directly with Eritrean President Isaias Afwerki. And in April of this year, Trump's special envoy returned to Cairo to meet with Egyptian President al-Sisi and inform him that the lifting of sanctions was imminent. 3 meetings, 3 countries, and a plan with Cairo at its center. The fact is, VisualPolitik community, this is where one of the most important and least discussed players in this entire story comes into play. The country acting as an intermediary between Washington and Asmara, Egypt, a country that clearly has reasons for doing this.
Shipping attacks cut Egypt's Suez Canal revenues by $10 billion, LCC.
The war in Iran and the chaos in the Red Sea have cost Egypt a staggering amount of money in recent years. And for a country with public finances as strained as Egypt, that $10 billion blow is, quite simply, devastating. Of course, what's important about Egypt getting itself into this mess isn't that, but what this news tells us. Take a look.
Ethiopia inaugurates Africa's largest hydroelectric dam as Egypt rift deepens. Ethiopian PM says dam will electrify entire region, but Egypt fears it could restrict water supply during droughts.
Exactly. Ethiopia inaugurated the Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam last year and has also announced new hydropower projects on this same river. For Ethiopia, these dams are essential to becoming a regional energy powerhouse. For Egypt, however, they represent an existential threat. The country depends almost entirely on the Nile for its water supply and fears losing control over the river's flow. It believes this will give Addis Ababa enormous influence. That's why Cairo has spent years developing a regional strategy to encircle and pressure Ethiopia, and surprise, surprise, Eritrea is part of this plan. That, and nothing else, is Cairo's main objective: to use the historic conflict between Eritrea and Ethiopia to weaken Abiy Ahmed's government, which is also obsessed with securing access to the sea, something Eritrea automatically interprets as a direct threat. Keep in mind that Ethiopia has more than 138 million inhabitants, while Eritrea, by contrast, barely exceeds 3 or 4 million. In other words, in the long run, Addis Ababa has everything it needs to swallow up its former traveling companion once again. And so, here lies one of the major problems for the United States, that in trying to control the Houthis, it ends up igniting the flames of a new conflict in this corner of Africa. In any case, if one thing is clear, it's that securing passage through the Red Sea is no longer a whim, and in that context, Eritrea is scoring major points, despite being under the command of one of the most terrifying governments in existence. But those are mere details for the White House. Times have changed in Washington, and the question remains, do you think the United States is doing the right thing by reaching out to Eritrea? Could this alliance stabilize the Red Sea, or will it only make the situation in the Horn of Africa even worse? Are we witnessing a masterstroke by Washington to contain Iran? Or the beginning of another geopolitical disaster? Leave your thoughts below in the comments and let's start the discussion. And very importantly, if you like this video, give it a like and subscribe to VisualPolitik if you haven't already. As always, thanks for being there, all the best, I'll see you next time.